See if I can't get all of the councillors' faces up here and running.
We're good.
Bear with me as I get everybody up here on the screen. Okay, thank you. I think I got everyone up. So I'd like to call this regular council meeting of May 26, 2020 to order. I'm going to ask for the adoption of the agenda, and I would like someone to amend the agenda as we adopt to include items 11I and J. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Charlotte. Is there a seconder for that motion? Oh, sorry, Councillor Brooks Hill. I see you down in the bottom there. But we're amending to include a couple items: opening of the campground and relaxing of the primary liquor regarding patios, that sort of thing. So we're going to bring those in as well. So all those in favor? Motion's carried. The agenda has been adopted as amended. So I'm going to ask for adoption of the minutes of May 12th, 2020. Councillor Juncker, Councillor Rind, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Any business arising from those minutes of May 12th? Seeing none, I am going to go on to announcements from the mayor. So I just want to say that we have received an award from SILGA. SILGA Community Excellence Awards. SILGA Board's pleased to announce City of Revelstoke's the winner of the 2020 SILGA Community Excellence Award in the Economic Development category for the submission on food security. So I just want to say kudos to Melissa Hemphill and the food security team. And I don't know whether all of you can see this award, beautiful award from SILGA. So we're very proud that food security is something that we won this for. So kudos to all those involved in that. And I want to just say thank you for all the effort that's been put forward on that. I want to now move forward to 11A, staff reports. I'll get a motion on the table, and then I believe Angela is here from BDO. She's going to do a bit of a presentation. So someone want to put that on, please? Councillor Juncker?
Yes, 11A.
Yes, please.
That's the City of Revelstoke consolidated financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2019 be approved.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Elliott. So I'm going to ask Ms. Spencer if you'd like to do a presentation on our
Absolutely.
financial statements.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, Council. So my name is Angie Spencer. I'm a partner with BDO, and we are the independent auditors of the city. And we have concluded our audit on the financial statements as at December 31st. So I'm just going to run through those quite briefly with you today. So up on the screen on pages 2 and 3 of your financial statements, that's our independent audit report. So essentially, we have substantially completed our audit as of today, subject to your approval. And our opinion, which is the first couple of paragraphs there, have concluded that we're issuing an unqualified audit opinion, which means that the financial statements are free of any material misstatement. Also, which would be forwarded for your reading, is our audit findings report. Just as a high level, there weren't any significant findings that I have to communicate to you today, so that's great. There were no significant changes in accounting standards for the year, so there were no new disclosure requirements, etc. So the financial statements will look quite similar to previous years. So I'm just going to move on to the balance sheet now, which is on page 4 of the financial statements. So overall, as you can see, cash and cash equivalents, that increased by about 2.7 million. So there was overall an operating surplus for the year, which was offset by significant capital asset purchases, infrastructure investment, and also some liquidated investments. Taxes receivable, that was consistent with prior year. Accounts receivable increased by about 783,000. That was largely due to some government grants that were outstanding in 2018, and also increased Big Eddy funding receivable. Other assets are similar to prior years, with total assets at December 31st coming in at 38.2 million. In terms of liabilities, accounts payable decreased by 1.8 million over last year. That was due to several construction projects on the go for 2018. And in addition, there was also the property reassessment liability that was paid out in 2019 and accrued for at the end of last year. Deferred revenue increased by 1.4 million. That's made up of several deferred grants, which will be spent in future years, as well as approximately 500,000 in increased developer contributions related to the increase in construction projects around the city. Long-term debt just changed due to principal repayments, so there were no new long-term debts taken out during the year, so just repayments. And then towards the bottom is tangible capital assets, came in at 76.2 million. That's the cost value of it less amortization. There was about 5.6 million in capital infrastructure additions during the year. And like I said, that was offset by amortization. So overall, the total accumulated surplus at the end of the year came in at 88.4 million. So moving on to page 5, this is the statement of operations, so a summary of revenue and expenditures for the year. Overall taxation was up over 2018. That was largely due to last year there being a reduction from the supplemental assessment. But overall, the tax amounts were fairly consistent year over year. So there's a more detailed note in the note 11 of the financials that illustrates that. Government grants was very consistent with 2018. Contributions by developers was higher in 2018 due to the Big Eddy project funding recognized related to those upgrades. User fees and other service charges, those continue to increase year over year as more connections come on board. And then the other two are the equity income for the subsidiaries. That's in RCFC and RCEC. RCFC was showing a small decrease. That's largely due to just the timing of the revenue and expenses recognized in the city. So for 2019 is a 4-month period, whereas the comparatives in the previous year was a 20-month period covering those results. And then expenditures. So overall expenditures increased by about 7% over prior year. Just in general, there was a general increase in maintenance costs for parks, recreation programs, events in the community, as well as a general increase in protective service costs. So as I mentioned, there weren't any changes to note disclosures, so I'm not proposing to go through all the note disclosures to the financials. Those just provide more detail to the numbers in the balance sheet and the income statement. I would highlight that on page 22, there is additional disclosure that we did add around just the COVID-19, the circumstances that it provides a lot more uncertainty for, the financial results going forward into 2020, just with the uncertainty around different facilities being opened, et cetera. So we've just illustrated that to the users of the financial statements here. So that's all I had on the financial statements. Is there any questions at all on those?
Councilors, any questions for Ms. Spencer?
Yes.
Councilor Juncker, then Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. Just a couple quick questions, just like points of clarification, if that's all right. Just to make sure I was, and I didn't mean to, I lost the page. Just on the on our long-term debt, Here it is. So the balance at January 1st, 2019 was 16,819,000, but the balance at December 31st, so of this previous year, was 15,330,409.
Yep.
So principal repayments and then the actuarial, or however you say that, adjustments, what are those?
So essentially, with the MFA, the way they structure their debt is there is what they call an actuarial adjustment. So interest that's earned on income and investments that are with the MFA are come through in an actuarial adjustment that essentially reduces the amount of repayments that the city is required to have. So that's broken down in note 7 of the financial statements, just in terms of what was principal repayments versus the actuarial adjustments.
Okay, so at the December 31st, 2018, and then in a year, pardon me, so from December 31st, 2018 to December 31st, 2019, the debt has come down 1.5, 1.6 million.
Correct.
Am
Yep. About 1.5 million.
Correctly?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks for answering. And then my other question, in terms of actual surplus cash, I believe last year we were like 3 million somewhere. I'm trying to find it. What's the current surplus that we're sitting on this year? After.
So do you mean that what your cash surplus was versus, so if you go to page 7 of the financial statements, there's your actual cash flow statement. So obviously is That's how much cash is actually held by the city at year end. But if you see the net change in cash and cash equivalents, so you'll see there was an increase of about 2.7 million.
Yeah.
That is what, from a cash perspective, was the surplus for the year for the city.
Okay, and so that's obviously come from a combination of increased tax revenue versus maybe not necessarily spending as much on capital projects or whatnot, but at the end of the day, we had an increased cash surplus of approximately 2.7 million.
Yes, and I would caution that's very much a timing. So, a lot of these are just projects that maybe didn't come in, or you're.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but overall, that
a lot of them, and sometimes they don't come to fruition. So it appears that it's a surplus, but it might be spent this year.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to make sure I clarified that. Awesome, that's all the questions. Thank you for the report as usual. You guys do a great job. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Councilor Rind.
Hi, thanks, Angela, for the great presentation. So on the balance sheet, it says there's inventories of supplies, and I'm curious what that is. I'm assuming it's not like infrastructure and stuff, because that'd be under capital. So
yeah, so a lot of that is gravel pit. So there's gas, like airport gas. There's gravel, small amounts of supplies, but those are the two big ones that would make up that balance.
Yeah, awesome, thanks. And then I'm sorry, I also have just points of clarification, but I have a few of them, so just bear with me. For the income statement, there's the other category under the revenues.
Yes.
And it seemed to have been very under budgeted. I'm curious what that is for.
Let me just see if I have something at my fingertips.
So, yeah, sorry if it's a bit
granular. That's okay. And Shannon or Tanya could jump in if they know off the top of their head. I'm just going to see if I can find.
Sorry, I can't help you. Not off the top of my head.
Anna, do you have something? You're waving your hand.
Yes, that's the actuarial gain on the long-term debt.
Thanks, Shanna.
Okay.
Another question, Councillor?
I do, yeah. So then in the expenses under general government, I assume that includes administration, department, but does it include bylaw enforcement, and how about legal expenses?
So I think it would be best to refer down into the segmented reporting for that. So if you go to page 24 and 25,
Yeah.
it will break down in like general government what it's made up of from an expense side of things. So it's broken down kind of by salaries and wages, supplies and services, interest and amortization. I don't have enough detail on the specifics of, you know, what.
I think it's probably more of a question for Tanya more than anything, because it's not in the 24 and 25. That doesn't break it down in terms of administration and things like that. It's okay. I can always ask later.
Yeah, I believe bylaws down in protective services.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the general government.
You have another question, Councillor? Councillor Juncker would like to weigh in at some point, but I'll let you go again.
Sure. The accumulated surplus that Cody was mentioning for the 2.2 million, I guess it's 2.2 in non-cash. What's the plan for that? Does that usually just flow into reserves?
Are you talking about the annual surplus?
Yes.
The 6.4, so that was used to, $1 million of that went towards paying down the principal debt, and then the balance of it was used to go into reserves.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, when I said 2.2, I was just meaning the unexpected surplus, I guess, because we had budgeted for a surplus, and then, so in future, when we do have an unexpected surplus that wasn't budgeted for, it goes to paying off debt and reserves, is that right?
Yeah, so this is the consolidated statements, and they're done on a PSAB basis, not the same as the budget is done.
Yeah.
And so there is a slight difference there. So this isn't, yeah.
Okay. And sorry, you can go ahead, Cody, if you want.
Councillor Juncker, you have a question, and then Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for asking that question, Councillor Rind. I actually was curious about that. Just one other question about in terms of the debt, and I think that's a great policy, Ms. McCabe, that the unexpected goes to the debt and the reserves. That's terrific. Get that debt down, because these interest payments are money that could definitely be better used elsewhere. Question, when the debt has come down since 2019, or rather 2018 to 2019, of a difference of whatever it was, 1.4, 1.5 million, that extra money, did that go towards that unexpected surplus, or is that elsewhere? Am I just misunderstanding how to read that? Like, where's that 1.3, 1.4 million dollars now gone that we have because we're not paying that to debt anymore?
So that's part of the budget every year. So we do budget to pay down that $1 million every year. So it will continue on as long as the debt exists. Obviously, the amount that's going to principal repayments will be reduced as the debt is paid off. When for budget purposes, at that point, if we're reducing our principal payments, we then put them towards reserve fund contributions instead.
Okay, so that does fall into that budgeted surplus, and then falls over into, so and then any of the unexpected. So if we budget for a certain amount going towards our capital reserve, and then we have a higher than expected unexpected surplus, then portion of that would also be added to the reserves from this.
That is correct.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Elliott, and then back to Councillor Rind.
Just on the long-term debt, there's $15.3 million. What is that, one facility or one entity that's involved, or several?
That is several. That is made up of the debt for the RCMP building, the aquatic center, the sewer treatment plant. There was some upgrades to the water treatment facility. There's a lot of road rehabilitation in there from previous years. So it's quite a catch-all. The Big Eddy debt would be in there. The Thomas Brook debt would be in there. The CPR Hill sewer extension debt would be in there. So it's everything.
Okay. Maybe this is a question for Angela. As $15.3 million on a city that runs an annual budget of our size, is that a reasonable number, or we should be something concerned about or not so concerned about?
It's a challenging question because every single municipality is very different, but overall, it is not unusual in an organization and a municipality this size to carry this amount of debt. it's part of the kind of funding model where you need to have a significant amount of debt and be able to collect and repay that over time just to keep up with the capital infrastructure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I carry on, Gary?
One more, and then we'll go to Councillor Ryan again.
Just the operational reserves. Do we have a total? And I'm not able to bring up the statements here, but do we have a total on the total reserves that we have currently?
Yeah. So if you move Cindy to note 10, which is page 18, this kind of illustrates the overall total reserves. So you've got the reserves there of 17.2, close to 17.2 million.
And maybe, sorry, Kenya, what are we expecting to contribute to the reserves again this year?
Oh, you would ask me budget questions.
Sorry.
I'm going to, off the top of my head, I'm going to say 4 million, but I will, while we're talking, I will pull up my spreadsheet and have a look and confirm that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, thanks. I'm having some difficulty understanding note 15, probably because I'm not an accountant and it's too complicated, but I'm wondering if you can try and help me understand it better, because when I look on page 6 of the financials, it looks like we didn't budget for $5.6 million in capital assets, like expenditures. And I'm just wondering if maybe that's due to note 15, which I don't understand.
Right. So this is where I think,
bases.
there's a difference in terms of how the budgeting process happens and when we issue statements that are in accordance with the public sector accounting standards. And this note is really to reconcile that. So when you're coming up with your planned budget, you're of course coming up with a surplus of nil at the end of the year. And this kind of reconciles back to what's actually recorded in the financial statements, because there's various items in here that aren't part of the budget process and are more of an accounting piece to it. So for instance, amortization of your capital assets, that's not something that you budget for year over year, but that's something from an accounting standard that we have to adjust for and take into account. So that's the purpose of this note, is really to go back to, yes, you as councillors have approved a budget plan that would have had a nil surplus. And here's the adjustments that are done from an accounting basis that reflect what's shown in the statement of operations.
Okay, that's a great explanation. Thank you. So when I'm looking then at the budget versus the 2019 actuals, the 260 spent on land and $1 million on equipment and 2.5 on water, all those capital expenditures incurred in 2019, those were not budgeted for, but we kind of knew we would be paying for them with the surplus. Is that the idea?
They're budgeted for through the capital budget. And so that's, yeah, they are budgeted for. They're part of our capital budget.
Okay, so then why don't they show up on?
Because we budget for capital expenditures, not acquisition of tangible capital assets. It's not everything that we spend in the capital budget is actually a tangible capital asset. And so then it gets split out.
But then you would see the breakdown on that same report, wouldn't you?
Yes, yes. We have not been showing that in the budget side of things. I'll definitely have a look at that going forward.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. Then I have another question. Yep, I do have some more questions. On the cash flow statement, the 13 million change in portfolio investments, is that just a timing thing? Like I just noticed in 2018 we had negative and then a positive in 2019, and I'm curious what that's from.
Okay, I'm just moving to the cash flow statement here. So, so yes, if it has a bracket around it, it means that it was a decrease in the portfolio investments. Sorry, an increase in the portfolio investments. So last year there was a significant amount that was moved into investments, and this year it was actually withdrawn out of investments.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
thanks.
And a lot of that's to do with timing of projects. I mean, Tanya could comment more on that, but you know, essentially the money's being parked in those investments until which time projects are coming to fruition that the funds are needed.
That's correct.
I do have another question. I just have to find it. Okay, so in note 7, I know Cody was asking about long-term debt and mentioned that we had paid off about $1.5 million of long-term debt, but then in note 8, it mentions that our consolidated interest paid was $832,000 in 2019 versus $771. So I'm curious why our interest went up if our long-term debt went down.
We had some debt refinanced in 2019, and so the interest rates came in higher from when the debt was originally taken out. And so we're seeing adjustments to interest payments. Sometimes the interest rates go down and we benefit from it. This time they went up, and so it was extra cost.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. I do have a couple more questions on note 10. They're talking about accumulated surplus, and I'm curious what the tax equalization is for the restricted operating surpluses.
That's the one where we were holding the additional taxation revenue for the surplus or the supplementary assessments.
Awesome, thank you. And then the equity and tangible capital assets is 60 million, but then the other statement was saying that capital assets were 76. Is that because that's our equity portion and the other is the outstanding debt?
So the equity intangible is really what your cost base of your capital assets less any debt associated with it. So your equity in it, your equity piece of it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And then in note 13, it mentions that there's 2.8 million funding surplus for basic pension benefits on a going concern basis. Does that mean that we can and should be contributing less for employer benefits? Because it was mentioning in there that there was more than an adequate funding, and I'm just not sure how that piece works.
So yeah, this is a standard paragraph that all municipalities put in around the whole entire municipal fund. So it's not just related to the city. So your piece is just that one paragraph that talks about what your contribution to the pension plan is. And those are just the standard municipal rates that you would be contributing to as part of the plan.
Okay, so we don't actually make a decision on that number.
That's correct.
It's just based on how many employees we have in the plan. Okay.
Yeah.
I asked that already. I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay. Yeah. So in the note 17, there's a breakdown of all the different departments, and then it also allocates the taxation by department, and I'm curious how that allocation is done, and why some departments have a larger share of the taxation than others, and then resulting in those surpluses. Like, is that because we know we have to build up those reserves, or?
No, the allocation of the property taxation is just done based on expenditures.
Okay.
So the budget, so the departments that have larger expenditures get a larger share of the taxation revenue. Okay.
So the fact that some have significantly larger surpluses than others would suggest either that the expenses were a lot less than anticipated, or is there something else happening? Like, we know that transportation and sewer and water are going to need more for reserves, so we just purposely allocate.
Yeah, it doesn't actually reflect what's being transferred into their reserve funds. It's just allocating out the taxation, because we are required to allocate it out for the purposes of the segmented statements. When we're looking at the budget, we don't allocate out the property taxation revenue. We just treat it as revenue on its own, separate as part of the fiscal services. And so, yeah, it's just an arbitrary allocation.
So if it's arbitrary, then how are the amounts to the reserves decided on?
The amounts going into the reserves for the water and sewer are based on those rates, less the expenditures, and then we budget extras. We set fees so that we have a surplus so we can put it into reserves. And then for the other ones, for the other reserves, most reserves don't have small contributions done to them every year as part of the budgeting process. The largest ones would be the General Capital Reserve and the Transportation Infrastructure Reserve. Those have obviously larger contributions made to them. And those are decided at the time we do the budget, based on the obvious capital expenditures that are upcoming.
Right, but they're not determined with council. That's like a finance department decision then at that point.
Yes, well, as part of the budget process, the transfers to reserves come to council for approval.
Okay.
All right. How are we doing? Councillor Elliott, you have one more question before we move on?
Just, I know we've, Tanya, you mentioned 4 million as a budgeted reserve contribution this year. 2.7 was the operational surplus from last year, and then it's 2.2 from the year previous. Those operational surpluses, is this just an extra source of funding that maybe we're not, but I'm just kind of understand how come each year we have a surplus if we're already stashing away some extra money into the reserves anyway. I'm just not 100% certain on how this is happening.
There's a difference between the budget process, which is done to balance the budget, and during the budget process that's done following provincial legislation, we will use as expenses things such as reserve fund transfers and debt payments, debt repayments, so principal payments on debt. For the purposes of the PSAB statements, those are excluded. They're not considered to be an expense. And so the amounts that we're contributing to reserves and using to pay down our debt, the principal portion of those payments will always end up showing up as a surplus on these statements here. Mm-hmm. So that surplus every year we're either using it to pay down debt, and we're using it to transfer into reserves to save.
But we haven't accounted for it. We build a budget and tax the public to a certain amount, but every year we have a surplus, and we just keep adding that to
Yeah, so this is when we set the taxation rates, we set so that we're putting money away into reserves, and that's what this surplus represents. It's the transfers to the reserves plus the principal repayment on the debt. So if we didn't tax enough, we wouldn't have that surplus, but then we wouldn't be putting any money into reserves, and we wouldn't be able to pay down the debt either, the principal portions.
I'm not sure of that. I thought we had budgeted where we're collecting the reserve money anyway. Isn't that correct?
We are, and so for the purpose of these statements, the money that we transfer into reserves every year is part of the budget process. We show that when I show the budget to you, I show all the taxation and other revenues, less all the expenditures, less the reserve fund transfers and the principal debt repayments to get to zero. Okay. But for these statements, that reserve fund transfer and that principal repayment isn't an expenditure, so it ends up showing up as a surplus on the PSAB statements. It's a difference in accounting treatment. So we don't have $6.4 million extra to put into reserves, is effectively what I'm saying.
Yeah, but okay. Just that we just didn't explain that we're paying down debt each year of $2.5 million, $2.7 million. That didn't come out in any discussion to this point. So
Yep, in the budget we have the budget payments of interest and principal in each of the funds. So the general fund, the water fund, the sewer fund, and the Big Eddy. I budget for the repayment of the interest and principal every year. It's part of the expenditures that are shown.
All right.
Okay. So we're going to move on. Thank you all for your
So
comments.
Gary, I have one last question, please.
Is it related to the financial statements in front of us?
You betcha.
All right.
So when we're comparing year-to-year statements, I'm curious if it's more a question for Tanya, I suppose, but do the expenses stay the same, or is there a procedure in place or do you want to recategorize where an expense is allocated?
Are you talking about the grouping of the expenditures between the different line items and the expenses?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty consistent. Every now and then we might choose to move something. So at one point we moved the courthouse expenditures out of protective services and into transportation services, which is public works, because the courthouse doesn't have anything to do with the police department. But other than that, usually these do tend to stay consistent year over year.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. That's it for me.
That's it. Any other questions before we call a question? Thank you, Ms. Spencer. Appreciate your presentation and your input. So I'm now going to call a question approving the financial statements. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you again, Ms. Spencer. Appreciate your time and being
Thank
here
you.
and doing your presentation.
Thank you. And I just want to say a big thank you to Tanya and to Shiana and their team. This was a challenging year. We've, for the first time, had to audit this entirely remotely. So they did an excellent job of just really adapting to that and allowing us to conduct our work in a timely fashion. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. We're going to move on to 11B, establishing a finance committee. I want to put that motion on the table, please. Councillor Charlotte.
That the report titled Mayor's Establishment of a Finance Committee dated May 26, 2020 be received for information.
Seconder for that motion. Councillors. Councillor Rind. Any discussion on the motion? I'm just going to basically make a statement. I thought it was prudent that we establish a finance committee. I picked two councillors to be on that, Councillor Rind, Councillor Elliott, and an alternate, Councillor Charlotte. And that may switch over as we go forward, but at this point in time, for the next year, that's how I want to move. And I think it will be good for them, but also good for the community to have a finance committee to delve down into some of this stuff so that we have this stuff as we get to this point, we'll have the knowledge on it. Any further comments, Councillor Elliott?
It's great that I'm involved in this, and I look forward to the discussions. I'm just wondering about the arm's length and maybe some expertise in finance outside of the council, outside of people involved in the work right now. So I'm just wondering whether that's worth considering.
Well, at this point in time, let's just get into the nuts and bolts of this, and we have our staff to back us. If we need to have assistance, then our finance department will put that together for us. Anything further? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 11C, Development Service Disposition of Land regarding BC Housing. Someone want to put that motion on the table, please? Councillors, please. Councillor Charlotte.
I can do that. That the mayor and director of corporate administration be authorized to sign the lease agreement between the city of Revelstoke, BC Housing, and the Revelstoke Community Housing Society, located at 297 Humbert Street.
Okay, is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Junker. Any discussion on the motion? It's pretty straightforward. We're getting BC Housing Society is going to have some property in which to build. All those in favor? Oh, Councillor Brookshill, you had a question?
No, I just wanted to say I'm really happy to see this moving forward. It's been a long slog, but I'm really happy that this project's finally getting going, and hopefully we'll get to start building soon.
Awesome, great, thank you. Again, I'll ask all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Someone want to put item number 2 on, please? Councillor Elliott.
The mayor and director of corporate administration be authorized to sign subdivision plan EPP 87855.
Seconder for the motion. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to development services, item 11B, BC Housing, 1211 Front Street. I'm going to ask somebody to put the motion on the table. We'll second it, and then we're going to have a presentation. So someone want to put that on the table, please? Councillor Rind.
Yep. That development permit 2020-02 be approved for forming character for exterior alterations on the building located at 1211 Front Street, Parcel B, CL 6349, Block 5, Section 34, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Kootenay District Plan 9504.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott. I'm going to ask for presentation. Ms. Wade, your department, you have a presentation?
Thank you, Your Worship. Paul Simon here, representing Development Services. I have
Thanks, Paul.
a presentation that should be up on the screen for you guys now. So as stated, it is a development permit for exterior alterations to a multifamily building. So just to kind of give you a brief overview of the presentation, we'll start with some background, get into the details of the proposal, followed by policy direction that staff used to evaluate the application, and conclude with the staff evaluation and a summary. So to give you some background, it's located at 1211 Front Street. Property is about 0.8 acres in size. It does fall within the multifamily development permit area, zoned R4, so high density residential. As you can see from the zoning map here, the surrounding properties are zoned residential as well. So what we have in front of us is a development permit for form and character for the exterior finishes. So BC Housing is looking at doing some updates to a couple of their buildings within the city limits. So in particular, they're, in addition to the exterior finishes, they're going to be doing some substantial renovations internally, as well as some mechanical and electrical upgrades, and those are all evaluated through a separate building permit application. But what we have in front of council today is specifically the form and character component of it. So you can see from the rendering here, we have main building facades that will be refinished with an ocean blue hardy panel, iron gray hardy panel below the windows, iron gray wood posts on the balconies, black guardrails, and Arctic white soffits. So when we look at the policies that staff use to evaluate this application, it does come from the official community plan, and in specifically being the development permit area. So staff do feel that the changes to the building do promote a modern finish to provide for that high quality aesthetic within the multifamily development permit area, to ensure it has a continuity to it with respect to the surrounding development context. It does promote more earth or natural color tones to integrate with that natural environment and surrounding neighborhood. And staff do feel that the coloring choice in this particular circumstance does meet that policy. Again, no impact as a result of the development from staff's perspective for the surrounding land use. There is existing landscape features on site, and none of that is really being altered as a result of the application. When we look at parking and screening, again, there's no change as a result of this application. We're specifically looking at building envelope remediation. Garbage and recycling, again, no impact, and signage, no impact due to this particular application. So to give a quick summary, staff do feel that the application complies with the associated development permit area guidelines, and we are recommending issuance of the development permit for form and character. And just a quick note, I will say, staff have been reviewing the building permit concurrently with this, so that we could get it through quickly, because I know the contractors are eager to get going. So once this, if this does have council's ability to go through with issuing the development permit, they will be able to get going with the work quite quickly. So thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Councillors, any questions or concerns? Councillor Juncker?
Yeah, thank you. Couple things. I think this is terrific, and I'm still I think we all are very happy that the provincial government stepped up and purchased these two buildings that are on the council agenda today. So yeah, I have no problem approving this. I think it's long overdue. It'll look great and whatnot. Just a quick question in regards to the buildings for Ms. Wade or Mr. Simon. Is the intent for BC Housing to continue to own these and then have a property management company or whatnot manage them, thus maintaining this as attainable / affordable housing? And I ask not so much because of this particular building, but the other one that follows in E, which were similar development permit application. That building was notorious when it was privately owned for substantially overcharging and taking advantage of those less fortunate. So I just don't want to see these buildings get redone by the government and then handed off to private corporations again.
Through your worship, as far as staff are aware, the intent is for BC Housing to maintain ownership over the building.
Perfect, thank you. And thanks for doing the building permit cohesive or concurrence rather as well.
Councillors, any further questions regarding this development permit? I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simon. We will move on to E. I will ask for someone to read that, second it, and we'll get Mr. Simon to do presentation, please. Councillor Rind.
That development permit 2020-10 be approved for forming character for exterior alterations on the building located at 1949 LaForme Boulevard, Lot A, Section 33, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Kootenai, District Plan 11611.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Mr. Simon, if you do your presentation on this one, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, I have a brief presentation for Council. It will be very similar to the other one as they had submitted both these applications concurrently. So again, brief background, proposal overview, followed by the policy direction and a quick summary. So for this particular application, again, we're looking at a development permit for forming character for building envelope remediation. This one is located at 1949 LaForme Boulevard, Columbia Gardens. This one's a little bit larger piece of property, about 1.6 acres in size. Again, falls within development permit area F for multifamily, hence the need for a requirement for a development permit to facilitate the proposal. Again, similar to the other properties, zoned residential 4 for high density. And in this particular case, where it's located adjacent to Perks Drive, it's surrounded by residential as well as commercial on the adjacent side of the road there. So again, we're looking at a development permit for forming character just for the exterior finishes, and similar to the other application, they are going to be completing electrical and building envelope upgrades, as well as some interior renovations. So again, it includes main building facades refinish with a night gray hardy panel, iron gray hardy panel below the windows, as you can see, iron gray wood posts on the balconies, black guardrails, and Arctic white soffits. So again, staff look to the official community plan, specifically those policies within development permit area F to guide development here. Again, staff do feel that this promotes a high quality finish that will add some aesthetic appeal within the area into the building. They are using more earth and natural color tones, which is called for as per the development permit area policies. Surrounding properties predominantly zoned residential, so this development does mesh well with the existing neighborhood. Again, similar to the other application, there's existing landscaping on site that will not be impacted as a result of this proposal. And then with respect to parking, garbage and recycling, and signage, again, there's no changes to the actual use that's occurring on site. This all has to do with building envelope remediation. So there are no changes to these elements of the current development. So in summary, staff do feel that this does comply with the OCP development permit area guidelines, and we are recommending issuance of the development permit. And similar to the other development permit application, we have been working with BC Housing to evaluate both applications concurrently, this and the building permit. So upon issuance of the development permit, the construction work will be able to commence. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you again, Mr. Simon. Councilors, any questions or comments regarding Mr. Simon's presentation? And definitely nice to see that cleaning up this property at Columbia Gardens as well. Councillor Elliott.
I think that's great that they're both underway. Just a quick question on availability. Did they give any indication when this might be completed, or when we might assume they might bring back some housing into our housing stock?
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, this particular one for Columbia Gardens is going to be done in a couple different phases. So the first phase is going to start with the properties to the buildings to the west, and then the second phase will be the buildings to the east. Again, I know that they are targeting this construction season, so the sooner they can get underway, the better. I know that they are, again, chomping at the bit to get this complete, and basically upon issuance of this development permit, they would be putting the order in to actually have all the materials. They're just waiting on confirmation of the material and color choice. My assumption in speaking with them is that they're looking to have it wrapped up this year. But, you know, again, it would all be dependent on construction timelines with the applicant.
Great, thank you.
Councilors, any further comments or questions? Councillor Charlotte.
Just a quick shout out. I'm excited to see these ones go forward. Columbia Gardens is our first place we lived when we first moved to Revelstoke, and I think a lot of people could say that. And I've been watching it get gutted right down to the rafters, and all the mold is gone, and it's going to be a fantastic place for people to get started in our community. So I'm grateful to see this move forward.
Great, awesome. Any further comments? I'll ask the question, councillors, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Councillor Shalet, I'm going to get you to just take over for a moment while I just take a break. I just need to use the washroom. So if you would get the other motion put on for the next one, item G, please.
Okay, for item F. Next slide. Yeah, if somebody could make that motion.
Yeah, I will.
Thanks.
That the Lower Town project be awarded to Jake and J Construction Limited in the amount of $1,366,764, excluding applicable taxes.
Fabulous. And is there a seconder? Councillor Brooks Hill, thank you. Do we have a presentation on this one at all, or?
Your Worship, I do not have a presentation on this project. However, if there are questions, I'd be glad to answer them. In summary, we have a project that is under budget. It's going to be a great benefit to that portion of the community and create a whole bunch of sidewalk, new infrastructure, street lighting, storm.
Fantastic. I'm excited to watch it go. I just moved down into that neighborhood myself. So any questions? Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question through the chair for Mr. Black. And maybe I missed this and I'm struggling to bring the agenda up on my other thing here. But estimated completion is before the fall, I'm assuming. And is there a rough estimate of job creation on this?
Through your worship, Councillor Yonker, the project will be complete prior to September long weekend. We have not broken this project down into a number of jobs, man hours, out of town workers staying in accommodation or anything like that. However, for the subcontractors and the general are local.
General, yeah. Yeah, terrific to see. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I'm glad it's going to a local company. And I was just curious about the jobs, but at the end of the day, one job is better than 0 jobs. So glad to see it moving forward. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Your worship, you can have it back. We were just chatting a little bit about the Lower Town project, but I believe we're probably ready to call the question unless there's any other questions.
Councillors, any other questions regarding Lower Town? Nice to see this come to fruition. Thank you for that. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 11G. I'll ask that that's put on the table as well, and then we will have discussion and go further on that. Someone want to put that forward for me? Councillor Brooks Hill.
That the contract for City Hall Rehabilitation Project be awarded to Absolute Industries Limited in the amount of $1,116,000, excluding applicable taxes.
Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Elliott. Okay. Any discussion on the motion that's on the table? Councillor Brooks Hill and Councillor Juncker.
I have a couple of questions. I feel like they might have been answered before, but I received an email yesterday, I believe, with someone asking me these questions. So I just want to get it out there in the public. To do with the grant, there was concerns raised that it was not going to cover the work with the insulated sheets, but.
Okay, so I'm going to refer that to staff. So we're talking about the EFS on the outside. Mr. Black, do you want to weigh in on that, or Ms. Lowe, you're...
I thought I saw Ms. Lowe waving her hand.
Okay, so I'm missing that. Ms. Lowe, Mr. Slingerland, do you want to point of order?
Thank you, Your Worship. There is a presentation for this item that has been prepared, and Cindy will put that up momentarily.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's do the presentation and then we'll get into things.
Thank you, Your Worship. We put this presentation together quickly this morning to further present to the public and to council where we are in this project. Very brief, thank you. Cindy, next. So as you know, this is an iconic building and one of the first of its kind outside of the Lower Mainland, built in 1938. In the 70s, stucco was placed over the cast concrete, and now the concrete, let me start over. The stucco is now failing and delaminating off of the building, as you can see when you wander around the outside of the building. Chunks of it are falling off. Because it's delaminating, we're getting water underneath the stucco surface, and that is causing damage to the cast concrete underneath. Structural engineers in 2016-17 reviewed the building itself and determined that the building is very, very well done, and it has a long life cycle ahead of it. The issue we have is that the cast concrete is no longer protected from the elements, and we need to address that issue soon, or we will continue to see damage to the cast concrete building. So in 2016, staff contracted with MQN Architects out of Kelowna to develop plans and specifications for the rehabilitation of the building. And so, Cindy. Is that where I am? So my apologies. So the cladding system was determined to be the best solution to this problem out there. It is not exactly what was designed by the architect in 1938. It does mimic the same features as the original cast concrete building. Included in our scope is also replacing of the windows, doors, and the concrete stairs, planters, and exterior at-grade concrete works, which are also falling apart. So next slide, please. So as you are aware, the project budget developed in 2016 was about $800,000, $600,000 from the General Reserve Fund and $200,000 of a heritage grant. This year, first quarter, we tendered that plans and specifications. We received 2 bids, 2 tenders. The best price and proposal came in from Absolute Industries of Revelstoke. The tender price, however, was $1.116 million, which is about $316,000 more than we have in our budget. And then we add in engineering, architecture, and contingencies, that total budget then comes to approximately $1.28 million. So cost escalation. We've had this discussion before when we talked about the pavement maintenance program, which was developed in about 5 years ago also, and the cost to maintain things, build things, and construct things has gone up significantly. So this graph in front of you shows that approximately 60% increase in cost escalation for municipal building projects. Next slide, please. So in consideration of our original budget of 800,000, add 60% to that, that comes up to roughly $1.2, $1.3 million. So we believe we are right in the middle of where we should be from a cost perspective. So the tenders we do not believe are out of line. And here from the Director of Finance, just a quick statement that, yeah, the numbers look about right. Next slide. So in order to consider this project, because the costs were so big, we looked at breaking this into phases. doing just the envelope, removing the lead-based stucco, scaffolding, and then replacing the exterior with the IFAS system. Our contractor, the contractor who was the preferred proponent, developed some costs for us to consider this phasing. As it turns out, no matter how we cut the project up, we're going to be over budget this year. So just doing the envelope, it's $1,050,000. Phase 2 is roughly $425,000 in the following years. So the total cost would be closer to 1.5 million versus the 1.28 that we have for doing the whole project in one season. For this reason, staff does not believe that it's prudent or economical to the city or to the taxpayers to phase the project, as it costs the taxpayers almost $200,000 more to phase the project. Next slide, please. So in order to be creative and make sure that we can get this project done, assuming that we have continued cost escalations on the range of 15%, the longer we delay this project, the more expensive it's going to be. As you can see, had we done this project in 2016, it would have probably come in right around the budget of $800,000. Now here we are with 1.28 for the total project. If we wait again, we will also go up likely 15%. We will also lose this grant of $200,000, which expires March of next year. So as the Public Works Department and Engineering Group, we decided to look at projects that we could move around in our 5-year plan to finance this major project, which is home to most of the staff, most of the services to the community, and is an icon. So we considered moving the projects for this year, which were the mechanics, oil, and fluid storage and pump room, a roof replacement project at the Carpenter's building, sand shed, and the Jordan pit cover. Supervisor Kamenetsky has indicated that these will not impact operationally anybody or operations of city to the public. So we've managed to delay $400,000 in capital projects by deferring them over the next few years in order to fund this project this year. Next slide, please. So the contractor, Absolute, he's estimating that he's going to have about $300,000 in local wages for 15 workers in town for this project. Subs coming into town, hazardous material removal, about 200 person days. Now, obviously that is 8 workers, 50 days. Same with the cladding system, 240 person days, glazing, 50 person days. And we expect that they'll probably be spending in-town lodging, food, drinks in the order of $60,000 to $70,000 a year. Next slide, please.
Just before you go on, Mr. Black, Mr. Juncker, do you have a question at this point? Did you have a question at this point, Councilor Juncker? I can't hear you. You've got yourself muted.
Shoot, sorry, mute thing. Before we vote, I would like to ask some questions.
Okay, good. We'll let Mr. Black carry on. Thank you.
And
sorry,
so
Mr. Black.
that concludes my presentation, and we'd be glad to answer any questions. Should you have technical questions related to the architecture, the specifications, or the contractor, I would ask for a brief recess, and then I will reach out to those parties and obtain answers as needed.
Councilor Juncker, I'll let you go first. You had a question?
Yeah, I've got a few, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. I was just chuckling there because I had spoken to Ms. Lowe earlier today about the impacting the community and if there was any notice. Sorry, give me 1 second. I just need to relocate myself. If there was any impact to the community on the report in terms of jobs and whatnot. So it was great to see that. A couple things that I just wanted to comment and ask as well. First thing is that I am a firm believer in city halls and the municipalities being the crown jewel. I think it's something that all residents in every municipality should be proud of. That's where their city comes together. That's where business is done. And it's kind of the livelihood or the representation of democracy. I have concerns at this time about spending that much money. So that's why I wanted to just ask a few questions. Some of them were already answered. One of my big concerns is I too got that email, but prior to even getting that email, I just had a concern on whether or not the grant could be delayed any further, which was already answered as it has already been delayed for 3 years. So that question was answered. In terms of the actual project being deferred, I do have questions there. So just if I can explain my theory or reasoning behind the question. So we've deferred these 4 projects that operations, the manager of operations and Director Black have done their due diligence on to defer those 4 projects. By deferring those 4 projects, that frees up the cash from this year's capital reserve, which will then be able to finance the remainder of the City Hall renovation. However, deferring those 4 projects to next year or over the next 4 years adds additional costs to the capital reserve that were not additionally in there. So my question is, the math doesn't add up. So when we were going through budgeting earlier this year, Your Worship, Ms. McCabe had showed us the financial outlook for our capital reserves and what we needed to do, essentially how to fund them in order to keep them in the black. By adding 4 additional projects worth a few $100,000, we're going against what Ms. McCabe recommended in the one sense that we're going to be bringing those reserves down even lower. And so I'm kind of confused. By adding those projects, how are we going to now fund them again? Because that's an additional few $100,000. Are we just going to run the reserves down even tighter? Are we going to use those projects and then defer further projects? Or are we going to be looking at increasing taxes again to further fund those reserves now? Because the money has to come from somewhere. And I'm just confused on how we're going to find the money to fund these projects, or are we kicking other things down the can now?
Ms. McCabe, do you care to weigh in, please?
I do, Your Worship. So, Councillor Yunke, you're quite right. At the end of 2021, when we were looking at the 5-year financial plan, I was identifying that there's definitely an issue with the balance in the General Capital Reserve Fund at the end of 2021. In the budget that's been approved and adopted, the balance gets down to a low of $276,000. So what we've done in working with Public Works and Mr. Komanowski is we've looked at actually bumping out a number of projects beyond that risk point. And so once we get out to 2022, 2023, even better, the reserve fund then starts to rebuild again. And so what we've done is we've actually bumped them down a few years so that we can allow that to happen before we need to spend the money.
Right. Okay. So thank you for answer. And can I continue, Your Worship?
Yes, please, Councillor.
Yes. So thank you for clarifying. So if I understand you correctly, we're not deferring those to next year. They're going to be bumped a few years down the road, and other projects will most likely have to be kicked down a little bit as well. Am I correct in order to allow those to be financed? Is that correct?
Those particular projects have been moved farther down the road. Those are the only ones that have been deferred at this time.
But they're not being placed into the 2021.
No. No.
Okay, so
one, a little bit of the mechanics oil room, that one is being shifted to 2021, but the other ones are all being shifted out to 2022 and 2023.
Okay, thank you. That brings me further to my question. Why were those in the capital project budgeted for this year if by not needing them this year and deferring them a couple years, I'm not saying they're not necessary, but if they clearly wouldn't affect operations, which we never want to affect city operations or services, but if having them not in this year's or next year's doesn't affect operations, why aren't we doing a better job of appropriately putting them into the years? Because it seems like if we had now, by putting them in this year, if we didn't have this shortfall on City Hall, those would have been moving forward. But now what you're stating, or not you, but by doing this, we're stating that we actually didn't need to really do them this year or next. And I can say that we didn't need to because you're saying operations aren't affected. So we need to do it, but just not now. But by putting them in the reserve this year when we didn't need to, we taxed for something that we didn't need to do.
If I may, through your worship.
Yes.
As we develop this budget with very short feeding time for me arriving to the community, not knowing what our bandwidth was and trying to do the best we could with our budget, we assumed that we could build all of this stuff this year. We don't have that bandwidth. And so we would be deferring some of these projects regardless. And I take full responsibility for not being completely able to achieve the goal that we established in that budget. However, give me a little bit of time to get my feet on the ground here to make sure that we can do these things in the future years. These are big capital projects. We have a lot on the go. And so these bigger projects are easier to manage than multiple small projects. And the outcome of these major capital projects are going to show a huge benefit to the community and investment in the community. And so I am comfortable deferring these few projects. Do they need to be done? Absolutely. They are things that are typical for most mechanic shops, making sure our roofs don't leak and things like that. They are not leaking yet, but we will get there. And by budgeting in the future, if we have an emergency, we can certainly come back to council and refund, or not refund, but request additional funding to mitigate emergency services.
Councilor Juncker.
Thank you, and I appreciate the answer, and that you further answered my next question, which was going to be, regardless of whether or not we had this issue with a bit of the lacking of funds, were these projects going to go ahead this year, even though we had budgeted for them? And I understand that you are new to the team, and we're very glad to have you and whatnot. So totally, I very much understand and appreciate that moving forward, we'll do a better job. And that's only because I have two concerns. One, I'm always concerned about the taxpayer dollar and not overcharging for what we can't do. But on the same thing, I don't want to see staff overcommitting to things that you most likely can't get accomplished, or because you do that, you guys are going to work yourselves to literally going on stress leave because you're trying to get things done that you should have just said, we can't get to that this year, which would be totally appropriate. So I just don't want to see staff doing that. So that's appropriate. And I really appreciate you being upfront about that. That just further leads me to one other question then, Your Worship, if I may. Yes. So in regards to the phasing, I definitely understand, and I think staff are being really due diligent recommending the first option because obviously it's cheaper and we should always be considering that. But with the CBT, my understanding is that they're going to be getting a large influx of cash flow, which doesn't guarantee that we'll be getting any additional grants, but it does tell us that there's going to be more options to look at grant projects, or grant funding rather, for projects. So I'm curious what staff think about possibly looking at going forward with phase one. And then in the meantime, yes, if we split it into two phases, that could possibly cost the taxpayer more next year. However, I'm wondering what staff thinks, because if we split it into the two phases, we go ahead with phase one, that gives us more time for our team to go and try and find additional grant money, because this is a shovel-ready project. So there's going to be more money out there. And two, if we're unable to find additional grant money, do we consider maybe instead of deferring more projects, which is actually then those projects are going to cost more because we're deferring, do we look at borrowing next year at a very low amount on one of a one-time off thing at low interest rates and use that money borrowed to fund the rest of the project if we can't get the grant? And I only say that because it would be borrowing at such low interest rates. And if we're not, and we just continue to defer other projects, then those ones are going to cost more.
Ms. Lowe, do you care to weigh in regarding grant opportunities?
Yeah, unless Steve wants to talk first about the
the borrowing, or Tanya, I can talk about other grant opportunities. There is going to be another grant intake. However, they don't know if it's going to be this year or next year. And I have put the City Hall rehabilitation into that grant stream just so that we could be considered if they do decide to go forward with grants. I spoke with BC Heritage and CBT today, and they're very, very supportive of this rehabilitation of City Hall. So they are very interested in helping us if we need more help. However, it's just not a guarantee. That's the only thing I would have to say about that. But we are in good connection, and they are very interested in rehabilitating this building the way that we've proposed.
Okay, so now I'll go to Ms. McCabe or Mr. Black regarding borrowing. I'll get to you in a minute, Councillor Brooks Hill. And I'm thinking now, if we did everything in one phase where we did everything this year, and we're able to, as staff has suggested, defer, and we may be able to borrow for the other ones. And in the meantime, as we're moving forward, we know that Heritage BC through CBT is aware of what our situation is, and they'd be willing to grant money in the meantime. However, I'm going to ask Ms. McCabe or Mr. Black to weigh in about borrowing.
Through your worship, obviously borrowing is an option. However, it does, there is a policy where, the council's policy is to pay for things out of reserves, to fund reserves and build up the reserves to pay for the major assets that have to be worked on or repaired or bought. And so that's what staff has done in this report, is we've looked at how we can use the reserve funds to fund this rather than using debt.
All right, thank you. Councillor Juncker, do you have another question or further comment?
Yeah, just to, your worship, just to that point, I'm aware of the policy and I support that policy, and I think it's a tremendous policy. I think we should be looking to reserves before external borrowing. However, I do believe that there also are circumstances where long-term debt financing is appropriate. Look at the provincial government or the federal government, for example. It's huge long-term debt financing right now to help stimulate the economy. $400,000 in the grand scheme of things is not a huge chunk of change over borrowing over so many years. The interest rates Ms. McCabe had already talked about are quite low right now. So I just think it's a thought process. By phasing it, it does give us the opportunity to apply for additional grants. If we don't phase it, sure, we might spend a little bit less, but we are actually in the long run, and I would be curious to know how much. I didn't add the math, but by deferring those other 4 projects at least 2 years down the road, I would think that that chart that Mr. Black showed, about 10% increasing every year. So take 4 projects, add 10, 15% at least to each one, and the costs are going to start adding up on those as well. So I thought, just in my thinking process, was phase it, borrow that money, and then that allows you to continue to get those other ones done sooner and saves you the cost there, and maybe gives us grant money. I'm not sure. It was just a thought process I had.
Okay, Councillor Charlotte. Sorry, I missed Councillor Brooks Hill. Can I go to him, Councillor? First, he had his hand up for a long period of time, and I see him in the bottom corner here.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my initial question regarding the grant and CBT and Heritage BC, Ms. Lowe's already covered that. They're aware of what we're doing and they're happy with what we're doing. I just wanted to double check that. I had a question about the, I can't see that part of the report, but the EPIS system, the insulated panels. I'm guessing with the new windows in these panels, we'll see some kind of reduction in energy use at City Hall. There's that aspect as well. I'm guessing, if someone cares to weigh in on that.
That's correct, but I'll get Mr. Black to weigh in. Mr. Black.
Your Worship, yes, the R value will be going up from, I believe it's 8 to something like 14. It's not significant, but it is appropriate for this sort of building. The windows will be going up significantly, as many of the windows and door frames are extremely old. I attempted to develop a estimate of our cost savings on an annual basis. I know we spend approximately $20,000 a year on heating and cooling of that building and lighting. I was assuming that we'd get maybe 20% savings out of it. It's not significant, but it is there, and it will allow the facility to have a much better comfort rating for the people.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Brooksell, for that question, and Councillor Juncker for asking about the details of the deferrals. And it is kind of a juggling game with the different costs and benefits. And just like Councillor Brooksell was asking about the environmental impacts, I'm also curious about the just doing our due diligence and considering the human impacts as well. If we put this into 2 phases, that means that our City Hall is under construction for 2 years, not just 1. No matter when that gets deferred to, and that causes quite a bit of disruption in the workplace. So my expectation is if we can get this done in one fell swoop, that minimizes the disruption to our very busy city staff and allows them to focus on other projects and getting them shovel ready for grant applications and just moving forward on trying to wrap some things up so we can move on to other projects rather than trying to save ourselves $200,000, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that much money, while increasing our human costs quite a bit by having a construction zone at City Hall for more than what would otherwise be necessary. So I'm in full support of going forward in just 1 phase for that reason. Unless one of the staff wants to comment on that, I don't think that the human costs would balance out well against those economic savings.
Any councillor or any staff want to weigh in before I go to Councillor Rind? Councillor Rind.
Thanks. When the report was mentioning that the project cost includes engineering and contingency, is that engineering department time? Like,
Through your worship, Councillor Rind, the actual components are the architects and the consulting structural engineers who will be on site through the duration of the project and will be responsible for maintaining the integrity of the contract and the billing process. Staff will be part of that process, but not to an extent that is going to require us to be fully engaged in the project 100%.
okay, and those costs were not then budgeted for originally in 2017 or 16, whenever the 810,000 was developed?
Quite honestly, I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay.
However, I am comfortable with the funds, the way we created the budget for this project in this report.
Okay. There's a mention in the report of design life, and I don't know if that's just wording that I'm not familiar with, but to me, I saw that and was like, oh, maybe they're out of fashion, but I'm assuming it's like the windows are designed for 20 years and now it's been over 20 years or whatever, right? Not us.
Through your worship, that's exactly correct. It's like
Okay.
a 20-year warranty on your shingles on your roof.
Gotcha.
Some of the pipe in the ground in Lower Town is approximately 80 years old. It needs to be replaced.
Gotcha.
And,
So it's not just like, oh, it's old and out of design. Okay.
No, we want to
Okay.
maintain the integrity of this building and its if I can say, cool factor. I'm really pleased to bring this forward in this way because it is a very unique, iconic building. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's starting to show the wear, even if it's been maintained as well as a car, right? After 20, 25 years, it starts to get tired. And so we need to bring her back up to her former glory.
Okay. In the MQN report, they said that the concrete could not be restored. Do you know, I haven't seen that report, but what their reasonings were for that?
So once the sealant on the original concrete building, and I'm not an architect, however, I can pretend to be on So to be honest, the original building was cast concrete, and when they finished taking all the formwork off, they had to patch holes in it, and then they put a coating system on top of it. In the 70s, they put this stucco system on top of it because the original building was starting to not be waterproof anymore, and every time you have a freeze-thaw cycle, any little gap in those patches starts to pop off and fall. And so this new system will mimic what's out there. In the original building, it is not what was originally there. So underneath all of this stucco is concrete that's falling off. It's staining and that sort of stuff. And that is why we're not doing a rehab, we're doing a rehabilitation. Right?
Okay,
We're
as opposed to a restoration.
Yeah.
Mr. Komanowski, did you want to weigh in? Was your hand up there?
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. And just further to that as well, like, you know, once you try and remove the existing stucco system, you will see, well, that, you know, it's not just going to pop off and it's entirely perfectly. So there will be obviously those blemishes to repair as well, which would be very taxing to do as well.
And I think that's, if you look at the back of City Hall, there was a test patch done a year or two ago, and we see the pitting and those sorts of things on it. And that's what was the decision maker to say, we can't do it without rehabilitating the building. So
yeah, you would almost have to, you would have to almost sack the entire building or put another slurry on to get it to a texture that would look well.
Right. Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, so on that note, the building was built in 1938, so it's really old. I'm curious how much money has been put into it, just roughly, in the last 5 years, just like updating things and renovating things. And I don't know, maybe it's insignificant. I'm just curious.
Ms. McCabe or Mr. Komanowski, any comment on that? Other than paint, have we done anything to the exterior of the building?
Or the interior?
Well, we've moved things around on the interior. We've, you know, built offices, that sort of thing.
Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Your Worship, from the perspective of the exterior, we have done nothing but basically try and patch it back together. That's all we've done on the exterior. You know, our buildings team has done a good job, basic with the caulking and the paint and putting some facade touches on, but from a large capital perspective, we have not spent. It's basically small amounts of maintenance money.
Okay, I guess the reason I'm wondering is, or if there's any large future expenses aside from the exterior envelope on the interior building that are going to require maintaining, like, or do we need to redo our mechanical systems or whatever, the electrical wiring, or do any big renos? Because if we're going to be spending $1.3 million on this building, we could build a new city hall for that amount. I know that's not a popular opinion because it's an iconic building, but I think, yeah, I'm just curious what other expenses down the road you see for this building and taxpayer dollars.
Oh, it'll be some renovations interior wise, just in housing capacity for some of our staff. I don't anticipate them to be big dollars as far as that, but I don't know at this point. Other than that, I think it's just the exterior, and the whole idea of rehabilitating this building, aside from its heritage ability, is City Hall is right downtown, and it's an easy walking distance for the entire community to access its services. We could build another building somewhere else, but the prudent choice at this time would be to fix this one and maintain because of what it houses. Councilor Ryan, do you have another question or a comment?
Yeah, the cast concrete, I know it mentions in the report that it's in good shape, but I don't know, because I'm not an engineer, how long these kinds of buildings last. Is this sort of like it's going to be here forever kind of thing, or eventually is that concrete, even in the exterior insulation finish system, is it eventually going to deteriorate?
Through your worship, I believe the RJC report did mention that the building is in such good shape from a structural point of view that its life cycle is almost indefinite if we take care of the exterior.
Cool. All right, that's good to know.
They knew how to build it back in those days for $40,000.
Yeah.
Councillor Juncker, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Your Worship. And thanks for those questions, Councillor Ryan. Just in regards to the City Hall renovation, I still have deep concerns about the money being spent, going against, on the other hand, me believing that this building is iconic and needs to be restored to its historic look. The big thing for me here is whether or not we lose that grant. And if we're gonna risk losing a grant here, then I'm not gonna support deferring this. I never was in support of canceling it, but deferring it. So I will be supporting because I'm not willing to lose that grant. I think it would be irresponsible management of funds. Just with my question about the actual motion that was read then, if the resolution G1 is passed, is that then, do we have to indicate which phase we want to go with? Or is that, because the 1.1 million, or is that just going with the do it all in 1 year phase?
Doing it all in 1 year.
Okay, so, and then by amending the capital project on G2, that then amends it to defer the projects, correct?
I believe so, yes. Ms. McCabe's nodding yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions, Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Ryan?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in principle, I'm very happy about this project. It's any improvement in energy efficiency. That's a win. The employment opportunities for Absolute Construction with a local company, polishing up our civic image and upgrading the downtown core are all really benefits from this project. And I'm very pleased that it's going ahead. I do have a couple of concerns. Traffic management. We've got a lot of stuff going on in our town right now with this. The traffic circle is already creating havoc on that end of town. What are the implications in our downtown? Has that been discussed?
Mr. Block.
Through your worship, Councillor Elliott, we have not yet addressed the traffic management plan or construction management plan for this project, as it is still not awarded. That will be a priority to ensure that one, the community and public members are safe around the site. The project will be a scaffold system that will be totally enclosed to prohibit any of the lead-based paints from escaping the building envelope, and delivery of materials and those sorts of things we have not yet figured out. Most likely they will be on 2nd Street near the lot where the future base camp is going.
Yeah, I just think a lot of merchants in the downtown core don't need another obstacle to overcome. It's already a struggle for most. Just on the cladding, I know Absolute's a general contractor and they're involved with many different things. Would there not be, I guess, whether you've looked at just hiring the individual a siding company to address the issue rather than going through a general and then, adding more cost to the matter?
We did not consider that aspect, as we do not have the expertise as staff to manage a project like this. From the managing multiple subcontractors, scheduling, making sure everybody's in place, things are ordered. We would require a whole nother, probably 2 staff members to manage just this project for the summer, if we chose to do that.
Yeah, it's not a knock against Scott at Absolute. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question actually, and if we had the bandwidth and the expertise, I think we could certainly support pushing a project forward like that, but we do not have that bandwidth.
One more, Councillor Elliott, and then we'll move on.
Okay, well then I have a couple of things, but maybe the thorniest issue for me is that we went through a tax increase, a budget discussion, and it was based on a reserve matching the demands of various projects in the future. We have before us here that we could have reshuffled those projects and allowed them to occur at a later date, and we wouldn't have had to increase our taxes as much, possibly, up for discussion.
So that's getting off topic, Councillor Elliott. Thank you. I get where you're coming from. That's more related to the deferment, but we'll definitely ask those questions when we go back through the budget process. Councillor Ryan, do you have another question?
Yep. So just to be clear, because I'm not sure I was understanding before, the reason we're not considering taking off the stucco and then restoring the original concrete and just like repairing it and painting it is because even though that would likely be a lot cheaper, it would also be maybe not as cheap as we think, because in your experience in having removed parts of the exterior, you're saying there's a lot more work involved than you think. Is that
Mr. Black or Mr. Komanowski, you want to weigh in on that, please?
Through your worship, my understanding is that the contractor has been out to the site, has done additional exploration underneath the stucco, and has determined that in order to provide a finish that is appropriate for the community, that looks appropriate and is well done, it would take a lot more effort than has been previously estimated by just removing the stucco, stripping the concrete, patching it and painting it, because we do not know what is underneath there.
Sure, but with all due respect, obviously the contractor is going to favor the option that's more expensive versus the cheaper one because they're just making, a percentage.
I don't know whether that's a proper comment, Councillor Ryan. You're now making assumptions into something that you're not aware of.
Well, no, I'm just asking for clarification. Like, who was the contractor that was making that decision?
The contractor and the architecture team both have recommended this system, the cladding system, over the original due to unknowns and spalling and cracking concrete underneath the stucco system.
Okay. I'm going to go to Mr. Komanowski and then Ms. Lowe.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Yeah, we did an exploration or did those patches under council's orders there almost 2 years ago to do an exploratory look at how it would look if we remove some of the existing stucco. And we did that in the alley and on the tower. And it was determined at that time with the findings that it wasn't desirable to try and finish and get a desirable product and a finish. I'm afraid if we went down that avenue of stripping and trying to, it just would not be an acceptable finish for the community.
What about integrity to the building?
Yeah.
As well.
Ms. Lowe, do you want to weigh in?
Your Worship, one of the conditions for the grant application was also that we were going to try and protect the integrity of the actual historic building. So the EPIS system will mimic the look of what the building looked like. Whereas if we started doing any kind of slurrying or trying to fix the concrete, which has been determined not to be fixable, that we would not be able to retain that heritage look. So Heritage BC was really excited about us trying to make it look at least like poured cement when it's completed. And also they understand that the EPIS system will help protect the cement, the actual original. It's not going to do any more damage, whereas it will just continue to deteriorate if it's exposed. I don't know if that helps at all, but that's how the grant application was filled out.
Councillor Ryan, you have one more question, and then I'm going back to Councillor Elliott. He has another question.
Yeah. So if nothing happened, if we just didn't move forward with this project, is the deterioration of the stucco, it would lead to the deterioration of what is otherwise a very good cast concrete skeleton. Is that the idea here?
That is correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
and
it's
what we're seeing
do something
now,
or do nothing and potentially pay more later.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. What we're seeing now, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Komanowski, in some places near the tower, we're seeing pieces fall off. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott, did you have another question?
Just one more. It was regarding Mr. Black's comment about the 60% increase for municipal projects over the last 4 years. It was specific to municipal. Is that something that we should be triggering on, or or is that just construction in general?
I can't answer through Your Worship. Councillor Elliott, I cannot answer general contracting costs. However, I would suspect that they are on the same magnitude. I know municipal projects are typically more expensive than private development. Knowing that we're seeing about 15% per year, it also leads us to be very concerned about grants and making sure that when we do get grants that we can execute those projects almost immediately so that we are getting the best bang for our dollar. And so it's real important for us to be considering these things in our future to minimize costs to the taxpayer.
That answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Ryan, do you have another one?
Yeah, if, I don't know if this is just crazy, but given that it's such a large expense, is there any motivation to just patch the places that are being exposed in the meantime? Or is that just not a good solution? Like, you can't just like seal it up?
Through Your Worship, Council, the stucco system is delaminating from the sides. We don't know where that is delaminating. In order to do a process like you are describing, it would probably require some third-party people to come in with like X-ray machines and things like that to really look at the bonding of that stucco system to the concrete.
Right, because I guess the problem is where the water gets in, right?
Exactly, and it's that thaw that causes the big damage to concrete.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Okay, thanks. And I only have one other question.
Okay, go ahead.
What does Kathy English think?
Ms. Lowe, I think you know the answer.
That's great. I love that you asked that question because I was going to mention that I've spent some time with Kathy. We actually went down into the basement of the museum and pulled out all the old original designs to research colors and shapes and forms. And Kathy supports the ecosystem. She supports mimicking the look. She understands that the building's been left too long. And yeah, she's been integral and is continued to be part of the process. So she supports the process.
Awesome. If she's happy, that's excellent.
Yeah, she's been great.
Councillors, any further questions before I call the vote? So the vote for this is doing it all at one time for $1,116,000. I'll now ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move on to item G2. If somebody would put that.
I can read it, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Juncker.
That the capital projects budget in the 2020-2024 5-year financial plan be amended to accommodate the City Hall rehabilitation as outlined in the report.
Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Rind. Any discussion on that motion, moving those projects out? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. We are going to now move on to Parks, Rec, and Culture. The golf course item. Go ahead, please.
That the request from the Revelstoke Golf Club to open all other facilities at the Revelstoke Golf Course be approved, subject to receipt of a WorkSafe BC COVID-19 safety plan for the facilities.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, Your Worship. If I may, I just want to thank Ms. Donato for working nonstop with Dean and the golf course to see. I know she's probably been, not to take anything away from any other staff, but one of the busiest people with such a huge department having to be reopened again. and going through these stumbling blocks following the government. So I just think it's tremendous, and I have heard nothing but good things from people. I haven't been out yet to hit the links, but I've heard a lot of people that have and are very happy, and said that the plans that have been going on there, it's almost like you wouldn't even know, in the sense that it's so smooth, operating so well. So good job to them, and good job to Mr. Nato, and I think this is great.
Great, thank you. Mr. Nato, any comment on the motion opening everything up?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to give you a brief overview, I've had conversations with the general manager of the Revelstoke Golf Club on the current operations, and he's really pleased to report that everyone frequenting the course is abiding by the rules and following the physical distancing requirements. He's also had a WCB inspection already and completed the COVID safety plan. All policies and procedures are in place, and I'm in receipt of all those policy documents, as well as the WCB inspection. And yeah, they've done a great job in managing it and really implementing the guiding principles of COVID-19. So I'm really happy to bring forward this recommendation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Nato. Councillors, any further comments on the motion? I'm excited to see this move forward. I'm quite pleased that the golf course has gone out of their way to put everything in place so that we can get our residents out there and they can enjoy things. And it's a great amenity for the community. I'm now going to ask the question, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Appreciate that. We're going to move on to item I, which is the new item.
I can bring that on.
Okay.
That's a request from Cedar and Spruce Consulting Limited to open Williamson Lake Park and Campground be approved.
Okay. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Brooks Hill. Discussion on the motion. Do you want to weigh in, Mr. Nato, with any comments on Williamson's Lake?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just give you a brief overview on this one as well. So council may recall that on April 30th, we visited the original request, and at that time, the resolution on the table was to revisit the request after May 31st. However, given the recent announcement by the provincial government regarding the operation of provincial parks and rec sites, I'm bringing this report forward for your consideration today. The operators are requesting to gradually open all facilities, including the day use beach area and day use washroom buildings. All amenities within the park and the campground will be patrolled and cleaned by the campground staff. Signage will be also placed on site to remind visitors of the COVID-19 procedures and guiding principles. So I've done some research on how other local governments are moving forward with managing municipal owned campgrounds, and it really varies across the province. Some have chosen to limit registration to BC residents and others have not. Most private campgrounds are operating with open registration, so they're basically allowing anyone from Canada to visit their campground. The decision is really based on the comfort level of the community. And in our case, I'm recommending that we continue to follow the lead of the provincial government, along with prohibiting tent sites along the beach area so that people can physically distance as appropriate. And I would like to make council aware that the operators have expressed concern with my recommendation to limit registration to BC residents. However, they are on board with prohibiting camping on the beach.
Great. Thank you for that. Councillors, any comments? Councillor Juncker, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, Your Worship, and thanks, Mr. Nato, for that. I wasn't sure if we could ask about the BC residents or not, because that's I3, but is it okay to ask then?
Sure.
So in regards to the BC residents, there's no stats in the report. That it just basically says that a lot of the campers come from international or out of BC, but there's no stats that actually talk about the number. Am I correct?
Ms. Donato?
Your worship, I have not asked them for those stats, but I'm sure they could provide me with some statistical information.
Okay, that's okay. I was just curious about that for today's meeting. But in regards to the report, it talks about that the city doesn't collect any revenue. We just collect a fee based off the revenue, which I was understanding. My only concern with the limiting to BC aspect is, are we potentially bankrupting or contributing to what could be a negative loss? I mean, they're a contractor of the park. They are their own business in a sense. And by limiting to BC residents only, could we be theoretically causing them to have possibly go bankrupt or not do financially well, is what I'm trying to say.
Mr. Donato, any comment?
Through your worship, the campground fills up every year from what I understand. I know that a lot of BC residents will be traveling within BC this summer. So I think it's kind of difficult to predict. If people are staying close to home, the campground could be full of BC residents because people are choosing not to travel to other communities or other provinces. So it's really hard to say how it'll go.
And I'll just add that the provincial government has limited the BC provincial campgrounds to BC residents only at this point, and that started their reservation process on Monday. And they're already concerned that they are almost maxed out as far as the reservations go. So we're seeing BC residents already reserved. So I think we might see a spillover for our reservation process as well.
If I may, Your Worship, yeah, I agree. And to be fair, though, the BC Parks does fill up typically every year, and that website always collapses. Nobody can ever seem to fix that thing. But and I completely agree, and I completely support following the guidance of the province. The only difference for me when I look at this is going, okay, if the provincial parks campsites don't see as much revenue because they limit it to BC, then the provincial government can absorb that loss, and they'll be fine. But when we have a local contractor here that's running this campsite for the city, they are a business. Are they going to be fine if their revenue sees a substantial decrease? So I support this for now, I think, but I think that maybe if we could come back to this and say another month or something just to review and update, but I definitely think this is appropriate to get it open and the resolutions, and I will support as well the registration to BC only, because I agree with you, Your Worship. I do think the majority of BC and Revelstoke residents, it's a great place close to home, but I think we should come back to it in a month. My only other question just on that though is what about, and it talks about it a little bit in the report, but I have a lot of people at my main employer that aren't BC residents. They are international citizens that live here in Revelstoke. How's that going to work?
Mr. Donato, any comment on that, or is it something that we've even had a chance to think about?
Your Worship, it's not something that was brought up, but I would think that if the local can provide proof of residency within Revelstoke, that could be a consideration. I can discuss that with the operators.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I really appreciate it. And it only came to my mind that I was discussing with somebody the other day at my work that is here on a 2-year visa in Revelstoke. They can provide proof of residence in Revelstoke via their post office address and whatnot, but they are a citizen of Germany. And when they spoke to BC Parks the other day, they were told if you can't prove that you actually live here permanently and are like Canadian, a BC resident, then they would be denied. And he had explained that he has residence here and lives here and was told otherwise. So I just wanted to make sure that we make sure that doesn't happen in our terrific campsite.
And I think that's prudent, Councillor. I think that the proponent will look at those things. They want people to come here. I don't think they're going to be standing there with a stick. They're going to actually work with people as they come through, and if they can prove that they're a resident of BC and whatnot, then that's great. And we may see things change with the provincial government and the provincial health officer's orders as we move forward. Things seem to be changing on a regular basis. So we may be forced to revisit this just by Mr. Nadeau coming back to us because other things have changed within the provincial bailiwick. So I'm supportive of all of these things. I'm going to ask if any other councillors have questions or comments. Councillor Elliott.
Just curious, who, if the BC government's leading the charge on regulations and who we admit into our provinces, why wouldn't we just accept whatever mandate they give us? Why are we creating an extra hurdle? You know, if the BC government opens it up to Albertans or Saskatchewan or the people from the Yukon visiting, why would we be any different at Williamson's Lake? Or why do we need to create something?
Council, we're not doing anything different than what the provincial government's doing right now. We're following in step with what they're doing. We may need to revisit this as we go forward, but at this point in time, we're doing exactly what the provincial government's doing.
Yeah, so that's ultimately what I'm saying. Why even bother coming back to us again? Just follow what the BC government mandates.
Okay, I get you. Okay, that makes sense. We can do that. We can leave that to operations if you want, and they can make that change without coming back to council. Would all of councillors be favorable with that amendment? Because we haven't got to that part yet.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll ask that when we get to that question. So right now we're just going to open council or the campground. Any further questions on that?
Just one more question, sorry. The tent sites, I thought last year we'd sort of agreed that the 10 campsites along the beach were going to be more public access rather than campers. Was that sort of something we had decided last year?
I don't know whether we had closed any campsites, Mr. Nadeau.
Through your worship, we had some discussion around those campsites
when we started, yeah.
When we reviewed the contract with the new operators. So at that time, we discussed limiting the tent sites along the beach, which we did do. We cut back. I think we eliminated 3 spots along the beach. So the remaining spots are closer to the road access. So what we're recommending is completely eliminating all the camping sites along that beached grass area so that people could have more room to spread out.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't think there's a lot of campsites that are impacted by this recommendation. I believe it's 2 or 3 max.
No. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to answer the item number 1 that's already been put on the table to approve opening of the Williamson's Lake Park and Campground. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Now with item number 2, someone want to read that and we'll second that, please.
Yep, that 10 sites along the beach at Williamson Lake Park and Campground be prohibited.
There's a seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Now item number 3. It's kind of a thing that Councillor Elliott brought forward and even Councillor Juncker. If we want to change that wording on that or amend that motion to be limited to BC residents, or as the Director of Parks and Recreation wants to go forward with operations, are you interested in that? Councillor Juncker, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Your Worship. What if we were to amend it to say that Williamson Lake Park and Campground registration, something along the lines, and Ms. Lower can probably craft it, but along the lines of, I can't even come up with a word, but basically copying whatever BC provincial campsites do.
Okay. Are you all in favor of that, Mr. Nadeau, Ms. Lowe?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay, so we'll amend it to that sort of thing. Does that work for, do I need a seconder for that motion? Councillor Rind? Any further discussion on the motion? So it's amended now to do what the provincial government does. Councillor Charlotte, you have a question?
Yeah, I would just like to caution us in mimicking the provincial campgrounds. This is not a provincial campground. This is a city campground in the heart of our city. And as was pointed out, with the aquatic center closed, this is going to be a very popular destination for our residents. It is not a huge campground. I appreciate Councillor Junker's concerns about the viability of the business. And it is hard to predict what will happen, but I would expect it to be pretty popular. And with this being our heart of our community, welcoming out of province guests into that hub brings with it more risk in my mind. Just something to be cautious about. I think that giving maybe something along the lines of giving preference to local and BC residents. And I'm happy to support if this is the way council wants to go and we just follow the provincial campground guidelines, great. But just keeping in mind that this is a tiny little campground in the heart of our city. It is not a provincial campground.
Okay. Councillor Junker?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just confused, Councillor Charlotte, because the motion to follow the BC government for provincial campsites would limit to BC residents. Are you against limiting it to BC residents then?
No, fully supporting limiting it to BC residents. I would just say that it wouldn't be a bad thing for it to come back to us to have another discussion if the provincial campgrounds get opened up to out of province residents, that we could reconsider our city campground at that time and not blanket say whatever the province says we can do.
Oh, okay. So you would prefer to see staff come back if the provincial government does make changes to the provincial campsites, because you're more in favor of just limiting it to BC residents only, no matter what.
Potentially, and making that decision at that time. I mean, the situation keeps changing on a very constant basis. It's really hard to predict what's going on here. I'm just cautioning us to remember that this is not the same situation as a provincial campground. So this is our responsibility to make the right decision for our community. And if it is packed with local residents using the lake and enjoying the facilities and the campgrounds are full, then I don't see necessarily the need to open it up to out of province as fast as the provincial campgrounds, but I would happily have that conversation at that point.
Okay. Did I get a seconder for that change in the motion? Yes, I did. Okay. So we need to vote on that motion. Councillor Junker, you have a question.
Just a question, and I appreciate Councillor Charlotte's comments. Are we, and this is more of a legality question for maybe Ms. Lowe or whatnot, are we permitted as a municipality to, are we putting these rules in place under the COVID-19 health pandemic? Do we have the legality, because it is a municipally owned campsite, to restrict, if it was a non-COVID situation, to residents of whatever we want? Or are we doing this under a health pandemic order? If that makes sense.
We are doing it under a health pandemic order. And so that's really the only way that you can limit. If the provincial government came back and said they're going to open everything up, we don't have any option. We can't go against the provincial government and say, oh yeah, we're going to do the opposite of them. We have to follow along with the health orders. So
that's what I was trying to clarify, and that's why, because I completely understand Councillor Charlotte's perspective, and while I agree with it, I wasn't sure if that would actually really be legal to do, which is why I recommended following the government guideline.
Yeah, and I think at this point in time, things may open up, but because they've already set precedent by allowing residents of BC only to do their registrations in advance and reserving all that sort of thing, I'm not sure that we're going to see anything change anytime soon regarding that. We may, but we may be into the fall season before they make any changes. So I think with the amendment where we follow the BC government's rules, I think that's a prudent thing. I don't think we're going to be going against, or that we're going to see a number of other people coming from international being able to get access to that if the provincial government doesn't do it with their campgrounds. Okay, so we need to vote on the amended motion as put forward. Is there any further discussion on that? So we're limiting it to BC residents, but we're following the guidelines of the provincial government as to what they do as well, which gives Ms. Donato a choice to to change things should the government open things up. Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go on to item 11J.
Your worship, could I request a short recess?
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break here and then we'll come back.
Thank you.
All right.
Anybody want some chocolate?
Okay, we have all of council back, so we're going to go on to item 11J, temporary expanded service for liquor. Somebody want to put the motion on the table, and then do we have a presentation on this? Councillor Juncker, if you would put number 1 on, please.
Temporary measures on the requirement for licensees with a food primary, liquor primary, and manufacturer liquor license to not have to obtain approval through the city's liquor and cannabis licensing and public review process policy DS8 for a temporary expanded service area authorization until October 31st, 2020, in accordance with the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch Policy Directive number 20-13, issued by the province of British Columbia on May 22nd, 2020, and that explicit permission remains required from the city of Revelstoke for the use of sidewalks or other public spaces be implemented.
Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion. Ms. Wade, do you want to weigh in on this?
Through your worship, I could give just a high level overview for council in regards to this. So just to summarize the report before you, on Friday, May 22nd, a provincial directive came down from the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, LCRB. The main components of this directive were to assist licensees to open up in compliance with the provincial health officer's requirements for social distancing. In order for these licensees to be able to do social distancing and to be able to support their capacity, the province has been able to look at a temporary extended service area authorization, which will allow the licensees to spread their capacity over a larger area with this permit. This is only a temporary measure, and it's only to go until October 31st, 2020. They have done an online expedited approval process for the licensees in order to expedite opening up the business and being efficient in being able to process these applications. What they have asked is that these licensees seek local government approval. And the directive has outlined 2 ways to approach that. One is for council to do a resolution that does the pre-approval for the applications. The other would be to have individual applications go before council, or council to actually pass a resolution to delegate to staff. And that staff feels will take much longer period of time and not assist the businesses as much as option 1, which is the pre-approval and the recommendation before you. I can ask any other questions you have, but this is first of all a temporary measure. There's no financial impact to the city because anybody who wanted to expand in the future to any city lands would have to go through a formal permitting process. But in this case, and in order to facilitate these businesses, the province is allowing the pre-approval through the local governments to facilitate opening and spacing with these permits. They still will have to abide by any city bylaw, fire code, and encroachment permits as per our policies.
Great, thank you. I think, kudos to the provincial government for coming out quickly on this. It's going to make some measures, and it's going to give availability to outdoor patios or some sort of space for people who would have otherwise been shut down for the year. And so I think this is a good thing. So we're going to vote on item 1, and then we're going to talk about that. If there's any other questions on that, item 2 is the pre-approval motion. So item number 1 is just allowing this to go forward in conjunction with the provincial government moving it forward. Any comments on item number 1? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 2, will someone put that on for me, please?
Yeah, that also primary liquor, primary and manufacturer licensees in the city of Revelstoke in good standing with all applicable government regulations, licenses, and permits be pre-approved for temporary expanded service area authorization in accordance with LCRB Policy Directive number 20-13.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Elliott. I'm all for this. This allows staff to go ahead and pre-approve things according to rules and regulations without having to come back to council, and it'll speed things up for those people who are trying to get this done. Any other comments by councillors? Councillor Juncker and then Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, Your Worship, echoing your comments about great on the provincial government for stepping up and doing this, and also good on the municipalities who actually pressured the government to do this, as well as the Canadian Federation of Independent Business and the Vancouver and BC Restaurants Associations. The credit goes to them for pushing the government, but also to the government for actually listening and actually doing something. So, and I think this goes hand in hand with my motions further down below. And kudos as well to our staff for actually reacting so quickly to this government change and actually seeing this through. As my understanding is now that there's already applications in with the city, and I suspect we'll start seeing a lot more patios going up in the days ahead here. And I'll touch further in my motion about the retail aspect of it. But just one question for Ms. Wade, if I may. And I am in support of this. I don't think that we should have them coming back one by one. Let's delegate that off to staff. That if we did one by one, it's my opinion that you'd be adding unnecessary red tape and just further hindering businesses when we're trying to help them. So I think we'd be doing the complete opposite of the goal here. But just with Ms. Wade, what about fees and whatnot around this? Will there be any fees that need to be collected or waived?
I think I just want to weigh in, Ms. Wade, before you go further with that. We've talked with staff on that, and I believe that sort of thing will come to council at the next meeting. But now, Ms. Wade, if you'd like to speak to that.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, so the fees would be associated more with our policy for encroachment, because right now people pay for patios and chairs and tables and sandwich boards on our public lands. So that would be something for council to consider. And to Your Worship, yes, staff has prepared a report to come for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, just echoing the comments. I was trying to read through it as quick as possible before the meeting here, and looking at it, it looks like in this case, the liquor license fees are getting waived as part of this. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah, okay. And I, again, appreciate the speed of which this moves. I am in full support. I like the idea of having little microcosms throughout our city with expanded patios and ideas to get people more spaced out rather than centralizing into any one space. I think this will facilitate that in a way that allows each individual business to make the right decision for them and move forward in this temporary situation that we find ourselves in. So thank you, kudos.
Any further comments on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to correspondence 12A. Does someone want to put that on the table, please? Councillor Juncker.
That the letter dated May 13, 2020 from the North Columbia Environmental Society in respect to the Revelstoke landfill and transfer station environmental concerns be referred to staff.
Seconder for the motion. Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion, Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, just a question, Your Worship. This has come up a few times, and I was reading your email back to the NCS about it, and I mean, it's kind of a catch, or like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's in city lands, but it's managed by the CSRD, and therefore falls under their jurisdiction. But, and I know you represent our council and city on the CSRD. Would it not be appropriate or an idea for our council to ask you or staff to send off a letter to the CSRD inquiring about this, whatnot? Or what are your thoughts?
I've been having personal conversations with Mr. Von Nostrand about this for several months now. One of the proponents or one of the people that live out in the area has had some concerns. So he's brought those concerns forward to myself, to many other councillors, and to CSRD staff. He's working with the Ministry of Environment. They're working with the CSRD to rectify the situation. CSRD are well aware that there's issues that need to be dealt with very quickly. And so they're trying to work with the service provider that they have hired and with the Ministry of Environment to make sure that this is dealt with in a proper way. So the conversations are being had. It's not a formal letter that I'm sending. It's me as the mayor and a director of the CSRD saying there is an issue here. We know there's an issue. We need to deal with that. How do you propose that to be done? And so they're working with the Ministry of Environment to find out whether they need to use different fill or what the situation is. Any further comment or questions, or did I answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, you did. Thanks.
Any other councillors with concerns? Councillor Elliott?
Related, I think the biggest gas emitter, greenhouse gas consumer is organic waste in our landfill site. Just related to that letter, is there any word on the organic recycling program or implementation that was going to come from the CSRD?
Yeah, I think they're still planning on that and working through that, but I haven't heard anything. It hasn't been brought up. Of course, we've all been doing the Zoom meetings, and there's been so much stuff on the agenda. That hasn't been one of the things, but I'll just ask further, and maybe I can have an update for the next council meeting so that we know where we're at with that moving forward.
What about our environmental coordinator or the person that we hired to oversee the greenhouse issue? Is that in her mandate or is that in the engineering?
Mr. Black.
Through your worship, Councillor Elliott, Caitlin Hinton is our sustainability coordinator, and this does fall under her purview. We are developing a report for senior staff and then council, once approved, to talk about the composting program, which I think is what you're discussing.
Yes.
Here. Yeah. So those things are underway, and those are in Ms. Hinton's wheelhouse.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Okay, we're just going to vote on referring this letter to staff. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. We're now going to move on to item 12B. This is a motion brought forward by Councillor Juncker. And so here's how I want this to work. We're going to ask Councillor Juncker to read his motion. It's very self-explanatory as he goes through the whole thing. I'm going to make a brief statement, and then we're going to go on to each councillor. I'll ask each councillor to give some input, and then we're going to go back to Mr. Juncker to make a statement, and then we will vote on it. Now, Mr. Juncker, as we move forward, if councillors have questions of you, I will ask you to respond to that question and that question only, and then you'll be able to give information if other councillors have a question about your motion. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. I was hoping to actually talk to my motion before I.
You want to put your motion on and then talk to it briefly, and then
well, can I talk to it? What's appropriate with Ms. Lowe, because upon further discussions with Ms. Lowe, there might be some things changing here. So what would be appropriate to do first?
Ms. Lowe, do you want to weigh in, or you want me to just carry on?
Your worship, you can chair it. You can organize it the way you like.
Okay, so Councillor Juncker, because you think there might be a change, do you want to just weigh in? That might shorten up things. Okay, I'm going to allow you to do that. Okay.
Okay, thank you, and thanks, Ms. Lowe. So yeah, for council, just to discuss this first on the reason why it's here. So I know, as we all know, about the Economic Recovery Task Force, and I think that's a terrific thing. Just so you guys all know, I had a meeting with the mayor the other day, and I've had many discussions with Ms. Lowe, and they've both been very supportive of me trying to get my ideas at the table here, so I appreciate them. The reason why the motion is written more specifically is because I was unaware or not sure of how to write more of a generic motion as well, and I didn't want to inundate staff as they're already busting their butts right now with the EOC. So I wrote a specific motion, and I should say as well, and forgive me, I'm just kind of gonna just blab here. The other reason why is because I wasn't sure after talking about the Economic Recovery Task Force on how the timelines were going to add up. Was the Economic Recovery Task Force going to be meeting several times, coming back with a report in the fall? And if that was the case, then I would not be, I'd be content with that, but also realizing that we need to have some short-term quick wins here as well. And I didn't want to be seen for myself and or our council as sitting on our hands and maybe going in September, October, shoot, was there things that we could have done? After speaking with Ms. Lowe over the past several days and Ms. Babicki, who will be chairing that, the expectation from the Economic Recovery Task Force, now that Ms. Lowe has spoken to them, is that they will be coming back with several reports in the next few weeks on sidewalks, street closures, and whatnot. So when I talk about my motion here, my goal was for several reasons. I mean, it's always been kind of talked about. It's always been a personal idea of mine that I thought would benefit. It's something a lot of other municipalities were talking about and now over the last few days have moved towards. And one of the reasons why it actually comes off of the previous motion we just talked about and approved is because now with these expediting of the patios, a lot of streets in other municipalities, and even ours, for instance, are going to be, hopefully, in a perfect world, are going to be having a lot of patios on them, which thus eliminates parking, and thus makes me and others question the need for having that road accessible or not accessible to vehicles if there's going to be no parking on it. So that's a larger discussion for the permanent aspect of it. However, so continuing on my thought here, I am comfortable, and I'd like to hear what my fellow councillors think, and as well as the mayor, and Ms. Lowe can guide us in wording this, sending a resolution to the voting on a resolution rather, that would send this basically to the Economic Recovery Task Force and asking them to come back to us with before July 1st with their feedback and getting them to go and do the consultation of the business community and the residents. And I would like that to be included, and it involves patios, street closures and whatnot, specifically on Mackenzie. But my other thing that I wanted to talk to council, and this is why I just wanted to get this at the table so we could talk, was also about retail aspect. And Councillor Charlotte would know as well, she's on the retail side of things, that it's not just restaurateurs that are struggling, it's all business. And I want to make sure that we do whatever we can for our retail shops, whether it's Big Mountain Kitchen or Revy Outdoors or whatnot. I just gave you a little shout out there. But so whether that's allowing them, working with planning to work with encroachment so that they can further add a rack or two onto the sidewalk, whatever it is, let's figure out a way to get it done so we can help our merchants, our restaurants. I think none of us want to see in September or even sooner 4 lease signs going up on the windows. It's not good for the economy. So this was my purpose and intent of bringing this forward. So not just have this one specific motion, but be able to have this discussion and then get clarification from Ms. Lowe, which she was able to provide to me a little bit sooner about the Economic Recovery Task Force. So that's kind of what I'm hoping. That's why I'm not reading this motion per se, as I'm hoping we can just send one general resolution off to them. And by talking with Ms. Lowe as well, my kind of condition on it was doing that is to have this come back before July 1st. And then if need be, we can call a special council meeting to implement these and not say if it comes back at the end of June, we don't have to wait another 2 weeks to make these recommendations go forward. We can call a special council meeting and whatnot. In terms of, just so you guys know, I'm not just making this up, saying let's just do it. I kind of got thinking when a lot of restaurants started approaching me in my business where I'm quite accessible, saying they're really struggling, and some retail merchants, and it's not just on Mackenzie, it's all over Revelstoke, as we all know. I identified Mackenzie Avenue in particular as that's our street that typically hosts the car show, the farmer's market, has more patios than most. It's our downtown core. So that was my kind of thinking there. And the majority of businesses that did approach me were from Mackenzie Avenue. So in the last few days, I've talked to several of them. They've sent me text messages, emails saying that they're in some support of something, but nothing really too specific, just anything is better than nothing. So I did put it out on social media, as you all saw. That one particular post has been viewed over 13,000 times, has hundreds and hundreds of likes. So I think the support out there is pretty good. But agreeing with Ms. Lowe and Ms. Babicki, I don't want us to be seen as not working well with this economic recovery task force. Let's work hand in hand to accomplish the same goal. But I just wanted to make sure that we don't take too long. There are some things that will take longer. The economy is not going to be recovered in October. It's not going to be recovered next year. But if there's some things we can do in the next month, then let's do it. And that's kind of what I wanted to see. So the guidance from Ms. Lowe would be appreciated on how to write that resolution, to send that information to the task force, and then to have that report back within, say, the next 30 days or so.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Junker.
Thanks for allowing me to blab.
Mr. Swingerland is going to do a point of order on process. And so he's going to speak regarding that. And then we're going to go back to your intent. And I think your intent is good. But Mr. Swingerland, we need to do some process here first. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So if the floor would like to debate the item, we will need someone to first and second the item for it to come up to debate. As it's a notice of motion, there's several different options available. You can read the entire motion, and because it has action items on it, vote it down, propose a new motion, or you could propose the motion that you'd like to go along with it, such as referring this motion in its entirety to the Economic Recovery Task Force to report back by before July 1st to council. And then you could take that motion and pursue that motion with first, second debate, and then calling the question.
Ms. Lowe, you had your hand up?
Thanks. I just wanted to see what Ms. Lowe, because we had a conversation the other day. I just wanted if she could, the thought process that she had explained to me the other day.
Okay, Mr. Swingerland, thank you for that. Ms. Lowe, please.
Thank you. So, Councillor Junker, the motion that's on the table, we didn't put it on the table, so we're not voting on it or debating on it. If you want to withdraw this motion and put another motion on the table along the lines of when we
So do you think it's appropriate to send this entire motion to the Economic Recovery Task Force, Ms. Lowe, or what's your thought?
What I had was that the council initiatives regarding street closures and other forms of assistance for recovery of business as a result of COVID-19 be referred to the Economic Recovery Task Force for assessment and appropriate community engagement, and report back to council with the short-term initiatives I had in a timely manner. If you want to say before July 1st, then that would be appropriate as well. And that way there's a motion that encompasses everything. And if you want to step forward, then you second it and we can talk about it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you coming up with that. And the only thing I would change to that, so I haven't even put my motion on the table, in your worship. That's why I wanted to speak first, because I wanted to get it on to this table discussion, as you know, when we spoke the other day. So I would support and I would bring forward that motion. The only thing I would alter would be before July 1st. In a timely manner is still quite open. So I would like to see something before July 1st. I know that this task force, I believe, is meeting tomorrow, and they're going to be busting their butt. There's great people on it. So I believe that they're going to come back supporting a lot of what I've been talking about here. So if we need, let's do it. I can bring forward that motion, and then my motion that I had put on here is basically still intact. It's just being sent off to the Economic Recovery Task Force, which I'm in support of.
Okay, so I need a seconder for
they're
that
going to they're going to look at all those ideas. But so do you need me to read that motion out, Ms. Lowe?
Which motion? The first one?
No, the one that you had just discussed.
Yeah, if you're okay with that, then
yeah, just change it to July 1st.
And we need to get it seconded, right?
Councillor Brooks Hill has just seconded it.
Okay.
Okay, so further discussion on that. So thank you for that, Councillor Junker. I think your intent to assist the business community is great, and I really appreciate the fact that you're changing this. It'll go to the Economic Recovery Task Force. They do meet tomorrow. I'll get to you in a minute, Councillor Brooks Hill. And I think that they'll be able to engage with the community and with the merchants and be able to come back with something that works for everybody, not only on Mackenzie Avenue, but in the business area in the downtown core. So I'm very supportive of this going to the task force and allowing them to engage with the business owners and to see how it goes forward. Councillor Brooks Hill, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a few things to say about this. Personally, I think this should have happened 25 years ago, but I'm very much in support of referring this to the Economic Task Force because I struggled with the idea of rushing into this without consulting people, as well as in this context of the COVID-19 economic recovery. It's only focusing on Mackenzie Avenue, and I like the idea of trying to bring the whole downtown core commercial areas into it. But I think in general, closing down streets to pedestrian only in these commercial areas is taking off a lot of the council goals involving livability, sustainability, getting people out walking around and biking, as well as creating a community feel. And so I'm very much in support of this way of going forwards with it, with the Economic Task Force, so that we're consulting businesses and making sure that we're actually targeting what's going to work best for everyone.
And I think the idea here, by allowing the task force to engage with the community, is they're going to get wholesome feedback, not just what we want to hear, but what the members of the community really feel for their business. There has been some concern about closing the street to vehicular traffic because people may be driving down Victoria Road and don't realize we have a downtown core, that sort of thing. But the task force can engage with the merchants, it can engage with the public as a whole and come up with something that's suitable. You've given them a timeline. I support that. Is there any other councillors that want to weigh in? Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, I'm just curious. This is great. I think it's a wonderful idea. I just don't want to limit the Economic Task Force. I say maybe they should start coming up with a full economic strategy here for our community for the next year. You know, let's really give them some teeth and create the world we want to live in, and let's go at it. We have a real chance.
They are doing.
So yeah, let them go. Let them go. The Mackenzie Avenue is the first step, but it could be a multi-pronged attack on things.
Well, that's great. And so we're gonna start here, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah. And if there's something immediate, if there's something beyond this that doesn't take a month, let's act on that. If they can come up with something that needs more immediate attention.
Yeah, they'll handle that. Good. Councillor Charlotte, you have a comment?
Yeah, I support the revised motion. Just basically directing the task force to get back to us quick with some quick low-hanging fruit, some easy, fast solutions we can do for this summer. It's going to be a challenging summer for a lot of us, especially our hospitality industry and tourism. I know I've heard a lot of chatter around what does this even mean? What does this look like for my business with everything changing so quickly between being open for BC only and then when does it open up for the rest of it? How do you advertise a rental property for this kind of a situation? It's really challenging and scary as everything changes. I like the idea of leaving it up to each business. The more conversations I have with my fellow business owners, we all have our own challenges, we all have our own resources, and different solutions will work for all of us. I was also hesitant about specifically Mackenzie Avenue, just because I have been part of the conversations around Mackenzie Avenue road closures, sidewalk sales over the last, oh gosh, several years. So I think we're getting up to like 9 or 10 now. And it's always been a challenge, even when we do close down the street, is filling it appropriately. I was excited around the conversation around the transportation action team and collective impact. We were talking about transit and the realities of closing Mackenzie. When you look at the transit buses coming through and rerouting those, it sounds like that is hopefully going to be part of a long-term plan that will see our community more suited to active transportation and a little bit more amenable to these kinds of things. But I would like to see that in a long-term strategy rather than gut reaction. I want to see our staff and our community focusing on the smartest work rather than the hardest work. The other thing that I'm excited about with the task force taking a look at this is making sure that all the voices are at the table. This is going to be bringing various different industries to the same table, along with government support that know the regulations that are still in place as they change, obviously. I was super grateful to see that earlier motion that now the liquor licensing part of that was one of the big hangups with expanding spaces. So now that that's dealt with, we should hopefully be able to move forward a lot smarter on that. But getting all those voices to the same table, make sure that we don't miss something easy, that hopefully we make the right decisions and we can do some things that'll really help the majority of our businesses as we can. So like I said, everybody's in their own situation. So.
Councillor Rind, any comment? None? Okay. Councillor Juncker, any further comment? Your motion is about to be voted on. Okay, I'm going to ask the question. All those in favor of moving this to the Economic Task Force? Those opposed? It is passed unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Juncker, for bringing this to the community and for bringing this to council. I appreciate that. We're going to move on to item 13A, communications, management and protection plan of Mount Begbie area request update. So we sent a letter to the CSRD. They have penned a letter and sent it off to Minister Donaldson, supporting us and asking for a protection plan for the Mount Begbie area. So I've been appreciative of that. I had conversations with some of my fellow directors, and it's been really, I'm really appreciative of their motion moving that forward. So any further comment on that letter? Seeing none, the Development Special Advisory Planning Commission minute meetings of May 14th. Any comments on that? Seeing none, Economic Development Commission meeting minutes of April 29th. Ms. Braun, do you want to weigh in on that at all?
So your worship, no, thank you, I'm fine. Great,
thank you. Style Trend correspondence. So again, they're supportive of the motion that you've just brought forward, Councillor Juncker, and have got some ideas. So they'll be able to go through the Economic Task Force and discuss with them. And the NCES has sent a letter to support pedestrian walkways as well. So I think we'll get that all to the Economic Task Force, and they can basically give us a report back, and we'll see where we move forward. Any further comments? I think we're at the end of our council meeting. I want to thank all of you for your time, and thank the staff, and thank all of you for working hard to get through this meeting. I'm now going to ask for a motion to terminate. Councillor Rind, Councillor Elliott, all in favor? This meeting is terminated. Thank you all. Take care.